She was left to die in the desert, until a cowboy saved her, not knowing she was a millionaire. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us get back to our main character. The desert was merciless that afternoon. The sun glared down like molten steel, the wind carrying grains of sand that stung every inch of exposed skin. Along a deserted stretch of highway, a luxury sedan sat abandoned, its glossy black paint blistered by the heat. The driver's side door was ajar, the engine long dead, and no sound remained except for the hollow whistle of the wind. Not far from the car, she staggered forward, her heels sinking into the burning sand. Her expensive dress, once elegant, clung to her in sweat-soaked patches. Her lips were cracked, her throat raw from thirst, and her hands trembled as she tried to shield her eyes from the blinding light. Clutching a delicate handkerchief embroidered with the single initial E, she pressed it to her face as though it could anchor her fading strength. Her breathing grew ragged. Each step became heavier, her legs buckling under her. She collapsed to her knees, grains of sand scraping her palms, her chest rising and falling with shallow gasps. The vast emptiness stretched endlessly around her. No sign of help, no cars, no voices. Just the cruel silence of a desert that swallowed everything. Her mind drifted back to moments earlier. The argument in the car, the sharp words, the sudden decision. The driver who had once sworn loyalty, leaving her stranded without hesitation. She had screamed as the car sped away, kicking up clouds of dust until it disappeared into the horizon. And now, hours later, she was left to wither in the heat, abandoned like she was nothing. She pressed her forehead against the burning sand, her vision blurring. "Is this how it ends?" she whispered, her voice hoarse, almost swallowed by the wind. And then faint at first a sound. Hoofbeats. Slow, steady, almost unreal against the silence. She lifted her head with what little strength she had left. Through the heat waves rippling in the distance, she saw him, a lone rider, broad-shouldered, sitting tall on a chestnut horse. A wide-brimmed hat shaded his face, but even from afar, there was something unmistakably steady about his presence. He guided the horse closer, his figure growing sharper against the glowing horizon. A cowboy. Dust clung to his boots, his shirt was worn from work, and a rope coiled at his side. He looked like a man carved out of the desert itself, hard, weathered, yet unshaken. The horse halted a few feet away, and the cowboy narrowed his eyes at the sight before him. A woman in silk and diamonds, collapsed in the middle of nowhere. "Well," he muttered under his breath, his voice deep and edged with suspicion. "What in the world are you doing out here?" For a long moment, he did not move. He studied her like a puzzle that did not belong in this land of dust and grit. Then, almost begrudgingly, he swung down from his saddle. His boots sank into the sand with a heavy thud. He uncorked a canteen from his belt and tossed it gently toward her. The metal clattered beside her hand. She reached for it with trembling fingers, lifted it to her cracked lips, and drank. The water was warm, but life itself in liquid form. She coughed, choked, then clung to it desperately, her eyes brimming with relief. The cowboy stood with arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "You will not last an hour out here without help," he said finally. His tone was curt, almost dismissive, but his gaze lingered on her, as if silently debating whether to leave her or to carry her to safety. She looked up at him, sand stuck to her face, eyes wide and vulnerable. For the first time in hours, she felt a spark of hope. She did not know who he was, or why he had stopped, but right now, he was the only thread keeping her from the abyss. And so, in the endless desert where she had been left to die, fate had drawn her toward the one man who might save her life, though he had no idea she was not simply a desperate stranger, but a woman with a secret that could turn both their worlds upside down. The cowboy watched her drink from the canteen, his jaw set in a line of cautious silence. He did not rush toward her. He did not reach out to comfort her. Instead, he let her take in the water at her own pace, his eyes never leaving her face, In the desert, trust was as rare as rain. When she lowered the canteen, her voice trembled. "Thank you. I thought I was not going to make it." He adjusted the brim of his hat, squinting against the Sunday. "You would not have. Not out here. Not dressed like that." His gaze dropped to her silk dress and fragile shoes, the picture of someone completely out of place. Her cheeks burned, though it was not from the heat alone. She tried to steady herself on shaky legs, but the desert floor tilted beneath her. She stumbled forward, and he instinctively stepped in, catching her elbow before she fell again. His grip was firm, roughened by years of labor, but careful. He steadied her without a word. "Can you walk?" he asked. She shook her head, exhaustion painted across her face. He sighed, a sound of irritation more than sympathy. Figures. With practiced ease, he guided her toward his horse. The animal snorted, shifting its weight. But the cowboy calmed it with a quiet pat on the neck. She stared at the massive horse with wide eyes. I cannot." "You can or you will not survive the night," he said flatly. He crouched down, lacing his fingers together as a step. "Foot here, I will lift you." She hesitated only a second longer before placing her heel into his hands. In one swift motion, he boosted her upward, steadying her until she was perched awkwardly in the saddle. Then he swung up behind her, the leather creaking beneath their combined weight. The moment felt foreign, almost jarring. She, a woman who had once been chauffeured in luxury vehicles, was now clinging to the reins of a weathered cowboy's horse. And he, a man used to solitude, now found himself pressed close against a stranger whose perfume lingered faintly, even after hours in the Sunday. He clicked his tongue, and the horse moved into a steady trot. The endless desert stretched before them, the horizon painted in shades of burning gold and shadow. After a long silence, she spoke again. "Why are you helping me?" His answer was simple. "Because leaving you would sit wrong with me. Out here, you help someone when you can." "That is the way at Island." She turned slightly, studying his profile. His face was sun-worn, lined from years of harsh weather. Yet there was something steady, something quietly strong in his features. For the first time in hours, she felt a sense of safety. They rode in silence for miles, until the outline of a wooden shack came into view. A single lantern flickered faintly against the gathering dusk. Her body slumped with relief, but he remained alert, scanning the horizon for danger as if the desert itself might still have claws. When they arrived, he dismounted and offered his hand to her. She slid down unsteadily, her legs trembling when they touched the ground. Without a word, he guided her inside. The shack was small, built of rough planks and patched with care. A cot rested in one corner, a stove in the other, and shelves lined with jars of preserved food stood against the wall. It was simple, but to her, it felt like sanctuary. He fetched a worn blanket from the cot and draped it over her shoulders. She clutched it tightly, grateful for the warmth as night's chill began to settle in. "You will stay here tonight," he said. "Tomorrow, we will figure out what comes next." Her lips parted, as though she wanted to thank him, but the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she nodded, watching him move about the shack with deliberate, efficient motions. Every action, from setting water to boil to checking the horse's reins outside, spoke of a man who lived by routine and survival. For the first time since being abandoned, she let her eyes close for a moment. She was safe. Not rescued completely, not yet, but pulled back from the edge of death by the hands of a stranger who had no idea just how much her presence would change both their lives. The night deepened around the small shack, the desert air turning from scorching heat to an icy chill. The woman sat on the edge of the cot, the rough blanket wrapped tightly around her shoulders. The silence pressed in, broken only by the crackle of wood in the stove, and the occasional restless snort of the horse outside. The cowboy busied himself with simple tasks, moving with the kind of precision that came from years of repetition. He boiled water in a dented pot, poured it into a chipped enamel mug, and slid it across the small wooden table toward her. "It is not much, but it will warm you." She lifted the mug with both hands, the heat seeping into her cold fingers. The water was plain, but to her parched body, it felt like luxury. She glanced at him, wanting to speak, yet unsure what words could bridge the chasm between their two worlds. He leaned back in a chair, studying her in the flickering firelight. His eyes were sharp, guarded, but beneath the hard edges lay something softer. A quiet curiosity he did not voice. Finally, he broke the silence. "So, what is a woman like you doing out here? Alone, in the middle of nowhere?" Her chest tightened. She could not tell him the truth, not yet. Instead, she lowered her gaze and answered in a voice tinged with half-truth. "I was traveling with someone. He left me. I suppose he decided I was too much trouble." The cowboy frowned, his jaw tightening at the thought. "Left you in the desert to die? That is not trouble. That is cruelty." She gave a faint, almost bitter smile. "I have learned that when money is involved, loyalty can disappear in an instant." Ob. His eyes narrowed, but he did not press further. Instead, he leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Out here, money does not mean a thing. You cannot buy your way out of the sun or out of thirst. Out here, all you have is grit." The words struck her more deeply than she expected. She sipped the warm water, letting the silence stretch between them. Her eyes wandered across the shack, catching on small details. A framed photograph of an older woman with kind eyes, the glass cracked but carefully kept. A stack of worn books by the bed. Tools lined up neatly along the wall. This was a life of modesty, yes, but also of order and care. She set the mug down. "This place. It feels like it has history." His gaze followed hers to the photograph. For the first time, his face softened, though his voice carried a hint of sorrow. "My mother. She kept this place standing as long as she could. After she passed, it has just been me and the land." The woman felt an ache rise in her chest. For all her wealth, for all her influence in boardrooms and city skylines, she knew loneliness. She recognized it in him now, mirrored back in the quiet way he spoke. "I am sorry," she said softly. He shrugged, though his eyes lingered on the photograph. "It is life. The land takes, the land gives. You keep going." The stove crackled louder, filling the silence that followed. She tucked the blanket closer and allowed herself to study him more openly. His face was rugged, carved by sun and wind, but there was something steady, almost noble, in the way he carried himself. For a moment, she wondered if he saw her, as she truly was a woman not just stranded, but broken by betrayal. Or if to him, she was just a stranger who did not belong in his world. Her thoughts drifted back to the road, to the man who had abandoned her without hesitation. Shame and anger twisted inside her. But then her eyes returned to the cowboy across from her, sitting in quiet vigilance, and she felt something unexpected, a fragile spark of trust. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice almost lost to the crackle of the fire. "For not leaving me out there." He gave a slow nod, his gaze steady. "Like I said, out here you help when you can. But do not mistake me for a hero. I am just a man doing what feels right." The words hung in the air, simple yet heavy with meaning. Outside, the desert stretched on in silence, endless and merciless. But inside the small shack, two strangers sat across from one another, bound by circumstance, their worlds slowly beginning to overlap. And though neither of them knew it yet, the night would be the beginning of a bond that no wealth, no betrayal, and no secret could fully undo. The desert night was silent, but inside the shack the air carried an undercurrent of tension neither of them could quite name. The woman lay beneath the worn blanket, her eyes half closed, though her mind refused to rest. Every creak of the wooden walls, every pop from the stove reminded her that she was far from the world she knew. The cowboy moved quietly around the room, checking the locks on the doors, securing the shutters against the wind. His motions were deliberate, almost ritualistic, the kind of routine built on years of survival. She watched him from the cot, admiring the steadiness in him, though unease began to creep in. As he adjusted a lantern, his gaze landed on the handbag she had carried with her. It sat slouched in the corner, half open, the contents spilling slightly into the firelight. Something metallic glinted. He stepped closer, brow furrowing. Reaching down, he picked up the object. It was a wristwatch, sleek, heavy, its face encrusted with diamonds that caught the light like shards of ice. He turned it over in his hand, recognizing instantly that it was no ordinary accessory. This was the kind of thing that did not belong to someone struggling through the desert on their own. He looked back at her, his eyes narrowing. "Care to explain this?" His voice was low, measured, but laced with suspicion. She sat up, startled. her hand instinctively reaching for the watch before stopping midair. It is mine, she said quietly, her voice uneven. Yours? He repeated, holding it up to the firelight. Lady, I have been around long enough to know this costs more than most folks around here make in a lifetime. So, tell me the truth. Who are you really? Her lips parted, but no words came. The weight of his stare pressed against her. The truth clawed at her throat, desperate to escape, yet she swallowed it down. If she revealed everything now, if she told him who she was and what she carried on her shoulders, would he look at her differently? Would he see her as nothing but wealth and status, not as the woman who had nearly died in the sand? I cannot explain, she whispered finally. His jaw tightened, and for a moment, she feared he might order her out of his home. Instead, he set the watch down on the table with a heavy thud and leaned against the wall, arms crossed. You show up in the middle of the desert, half dead, dressed like you stepped out of a magazine, carrying jewelry worth more than this entire ranching town, and you expect me not to ask questions? Her heart pounded. She gripped the blanket tighter, forcing herself to meet his eyes. I am not who you think I am, she said softly, almost pleading. Then who are you? His voice cut through the silence like a blade. The question hung between them, unanswered. She could feel his doubt, his mistrust, settling heavy in the room. Yet beneath it, there was also restraint. For all his suspicion, he had not thrown her out. He had not abandoned her as the others had. The fire flickered, casting shifting shadows across his face. He was a man torn between instinct and compassion, between suspicion and the faint spark of something he could not yet name. Finally, he exhaled, pushing away from the wall. Keep your secrets, then. But know this out here, lies will get you killed faster than the Sunday. She nodded, her throat too tight to speak. The silence returned, thicker now, as though the desert itself had crept into the shack. She lay back down, her eyes wide open, the weight of her hidden identity pressing harder than ever. And across the room, the cowboy sat in his chair, watching her with guarded eyes, torn between the mystery she carried and the undeniable pull he felt toward her, even against his better judgment. The dawn broke harsh and cold over the desert, a pale light spilling through the cracks of the shack's wooden walls. The woman had barely slept. Every sound outside had kept her on edge, the rustle of wind, the cry of a distant coyote, the shifting of the horse tethered nearby. But most of all, it was the weight of the cowboy's words that lingered in her chest. Lies will get you killed faster than the Sunday. She sat up on the cot, rubbing her eyes, when a noise outside froze her in place. Not the shuffle of the horse, not the steady steps of the cowboy. This sound was different, an engine, the low growl of a vehicle crawling across the sand. The cowboy was already at the window, his hand hovering near the rifle that leaned against the wall. His shoulders tensed as he watched a dust cloud rise in the distance. Her blood ran cold. She recognized the shape of the vehicle long before he did. The same dark SUV that had left her stranded. The same men who had laughed as they drove away. She scrambled to her feet. They are here, she whispered, her voice trembling. The cowboy's head snapped toward her. Who? Before she could answer, the SUV screeched to a stop outside, and 3 men jumped out. The leader, a man with sharp features and an arrogant smirk, called out, his voice slicing through the morning air. Evelyn, you made it farther than I thought. The cowboy glanced at her sharply, but there was no time for questions. The men were already marching toward the shack, their boots crunching in the sand, their eyes dark with intent. The cowboy stepped in front of her, his broad frame a barrier between her and the door. Stay behind me, he said firmly. The door rattled as one of the men pounded on it. Open up, cowboy. That woman belongs to us. His grip tightened on the rifle. She does not belong to anyone. The door flew open with a violent shove. The leader smirked as he stepped inside, flanked by 2 others. His gaze swept over Evelyn, then lingered on the cowboy with mocking disdain. Look at this. The desert night in shining boots. Do you have any idea who you are protecting? The cowboy did not move, his voice low and steady. All I know is you left her to die. That is enough. The leader's grin widened. Then you are dumber than you look. He lunged forward, swinging a fist. The shack erupted in chaos. The cowboy met the attack head-on, blocking the punch and driving his shoulder into the man's chest. The other two rushed forward, one grabbing for Evelyn, the other swinging wildly at the cowboy. She screamed as rough hands caught her arm, yanking her back. Panic surged, but she fought with all the strength left in her, clawing, kicking, desperate not to be dragged away again. The cowboy roared, slamming the butt of his rifle into the attacker's jaw, sending him sprawling to the floor. Blood streaked across the boards. He spun, landing a punch squarely on the leader's face, but not before taking a brutal hit himself. His lip split, blood dripping down his chin, yet he stood firm, unshaken. "Run!" he barked at her, but she could not move. She was rooted to the spot, torn between fear and the impossible thought of leaving him to face them alone. The fight raged, dust and splinters flying as fists collided and bodies crashed into furniture. Evelyn pressed herself against the wall, her heart pounding, until at last one of the attackers groaned and collapsed. The cowboy staggered, bruised and bloodied, but still standing. The leader wiped blood from his mouth and glared at Evelyn with venom. "You think this cowboy can save you? You have no idea what you are in the middle of." Her hands trembled, but her voice rose with unexpected strength. "No, you have no idea what you are in the middle of." The words hung in the air, heavy with the promise of revelation. And in that moment, the cowboy realized that the stranger he had taken in was no ordinary woman. The storm was just beginning, and her secret was about to come crashing into both of their lives. The shack was in chaos, the floor littered with broken wood and drops of blood. The cowboy stood with his chest heaving, his knuckles raw, his rifle gripped tightly in one hand. Across from him, the men regrouped, bruised but not broken, their leader sneering through a split lip. Evelyn pressed herself against the wall, her heart hammering so loudly she could barely hear. The moment she had dreaded since being abandoned in the desert was here. The men who had betrayed her were back, and the cowboy who had saved her was bleeding because of them. The leader spat onto the floor and pointed at her with venom in his voice. "You think you can hide forever? You are finished, Evelyn. Once the world knows what you were planning, it will all come crashing down. You should have stayed quiet." The cowboy froze, his eyes flicking toward her in disbelief. "Evelyn?" he repeated, his voice low. She looked at him, shame and defiance warring inside her. Her secret could not remain hidden any longer. If she stayed silent, he would be dragged deeper into a danger that was never his to bear. Straightening her shoulders, Evelyn stepped forward, her voice trembling at first but growing steadier with each word. "You want the truth? Fine. I am Evelyn Hart. I am the owner of Evergold Enterprises, and the men who left me to die were supposed to be my business partners." The room stilled. Even the attackers paused, their smirks faltering at her sudden defiance. The cowboy stared at her as though seeing her for the first time. The silk dress, the diamond watch, the fragments of mystery all clicked into place. She was not just a stranded traveler. She was the missing heiress whose disappearance had been whispered about in every headline. Evelyn's voice sharpened. "You thought you could bury me in the desert, and no one would ever know. But you underestimated me, and you underestimated the truth." The leader lunged at her, fury burning in his eyes. But before he could reach her, the cowboy moved, planting himself between them with unshakable resolve. He shoved the man back with a force that rattled the walls. "Enough," the cowboy growled, his voice like iron. His body was battered, his lips split, yet his presence filled the room with something unyielding. "You are not taking her anywhere." The attackers hesitated. For the first time, doubt flickered in their expressions. Evelyn stood tall behind him, her fear giving way to a fierce determination. She had lived too long letting others dictate her fate. No more. "You will pay for what you did," she said, her words ringing with conviction. "Not just for leaving me to die, but for every lie you spun, every deal you corrupted, every betrayal you committed in the name of greed." The cowboy glanced back at her, and in his eyes she saw both shock and something else: respect. He had questioned her, doubted her, even mistrusted her. But now, watching her stand in her truth, he could not deny the strength radiating from her. The leader laughed bitterly, though his voice wavered. "Do you think anyone will believe you? It is your word against ours." Evelyn's answer was steady, unwavering. "No, it is not. I kept records. Every meeting, every transfer, every deceit you tried to bury. I have proof. And once the authorities see it, you will not be able to hide. The room thickened with silence. For the first time, Evelyn was not the one cornered. Her voice had shifted the balance, and the cowboy felt it too. He stepped forward, his rifle raised, his stance unyielding. You heard the lady. Your time is up. The attackers faltered, exchanging uneasy glances. They had not expected her to fight back, nor the cowboy to stand beside her with such raw conviction. And in that fragile pause, Evelyn felt the weight lift from her shoulders. The truth was no longer her burden alone. It was spoken aloud, undeniable, and the man who had saved her life was now standing with her, not against her. The desert outside was still and vast, but inside the shack, a storm had broken open. Identities revealed, lies shattered, and a fragile alliance forged in fire. For the first time since being left to die, Evelyn felt not just the spark of survival, but the flame of justice. The tension inside the shack hung like a blade ready to strike. Evelyn stood tall, her chest rising and falling with determination, while the cowboy's rifle never wavered from the men who had once been her partners. The attackers shifted uneasily, their bravado shaken by the force of her revelation. For a long moment, no one moved. Then, in the distance, came the sharp wail of sirens. The sound cut through the desert morning like a promise. The leader's face paled. You called them?" Evelyn's lips curved into a thin smile. "You think I came out here without a plan? The moment you abandoned me, the world was already looking for me. You should have known it was only a matter of time." Outside, red and blue lights flickered against the sand as two sheriff's vehicles pulled up. Dust swirled as uniformed officers spilled out, weapons drawn, shouting commands. The cowboy lowered his rifle slightly, his jaw still tight, as the officers stormed inside. In seconds, the three men were forced to the ground, their wrists bound in steel cuffs. Their protests rang hollow against the authority of the law. "You cannot prove anything!" the leader shouted as he was dragged outside. But his voice had lost its edge, his arrogance cracking under the weight of reality. Evelyn stepped forward, her voice steady and strong. "I already told you. I have proof. Every transaction, every betrayal, every time you tried to bury me to protect your empire. It is all documented. And now, the law will finish what you tried to erase." The sheriff glanced at her with recognition. "Miss Hart, the whole state has been searching for you. You are safe now." She nodded, though her eyes flicked toward the cowboy. He stood silent, his hands resting on the rifle, his gaze steady as ever. Despite the chaos around them, he remained her anchor. The men were shoved into the back of the patrol vehicles, their faces twisted in fury. The sirens faded as the cars sped away, leaving only dust in their wake. For the first time in days, Evelyn felt her lungs fill with air free of fear. Justice had not fully been served yet, but the first step had been taken. She had spoken the truth, and the law had answered. She turned to the cowboy, her voice softening. "I would not have survived without you." He gave a small shake of his head. "You did not need me to fight your battles. You already had the strength. All I did was stand beside you." His words struck her deeply. She had built an empire, yet she had never known what it meant for someone to stand by her without expectation, without demand. In that moment, as the desert sun climbed higher in the sky, Evelyn realized that justice was not only about punishing those who wronged her. It was also about honoring the truth, and about recognizing the quiet strength of the man who had saved her life and, unknowingly, her spirit. The dust had barely settled after the patrol cars disappeared over the horizon, but for Evelyn the weight on her shoulders felt lighter than it had in years. The shack was quiet again, save for the faint crackle of the stove and the horse shifting its weight outside. She stood near the doorway, the sunlight spilling over her like a new beginning. For days she had been haunted by betrayal, hunted by men who saw her as nothing more than a means to wealth. And yet here she was, alive, her voice stronger than ever, because of a cowboy who had chosen to protect her when he had every reason to walk away. She turned to him. He was wiping blood from the corner of his mouth with the back of his hand, his hat tilted low over his eyes. His shirt was torn, dust and sweat streaked his skin, but his presence radiated steadiness. He looked at her as if still trying to reconcile the woman who had collapsed in the desert with the powerful heiress who had stood tall against her betrayers. "You could have left me," she said softly. He shrugged, his voice gruff. Could have, but I did not. Some things a man just cannot walk away from. Her eyes stung with emotion. No one in her world of boardrooms and contracts had ever spoken with such simple truth. No one had ever offered loyalty without strings attached. She stepped closer, her voice trembling. All my life, people have looked at me and seen money, power, status. But you saw me as a person when I had nothing, when I was nothing. Wait. For a moment the cowboy said nothing. His eyes searched hers, deep and unreadable. Then, slowly, he set the rifle aside and straightened. You are not nothing. You never were. You were just lost. And sometimes it takes nearly dying in the desert to find out who you really are. Her breath caught at his words. The truth in them sank into her like rain into dry soil. Evelyn reached into her handbag, pulling out a folded piece of paper. She handed it to him, her hands shaking. This is a contract. Not the kind you are used to. This is an investment document. I want to fund your ranch. I want to help you rebuild the land your mother loved. He blinked, his brow furrowing. I do not need your charity. It is not charity, she insisted, her voice firm. It is a partnership. You saved me without knowing who I was. You stood by me when you had every reason to walk away. This is not about money. This is about building something together. A future. The silence stretched between them, heavy but not cold. He looked down at the paper, then back at her, searching her face for any trace of deceit. But all he saw was sincerity, raw and unguarded. Finally, his lips curved into the faintest smile. You are a stubborn woman, Evelyn Hart. Oh, she laughed, the sound breaking free like sunlight after a storm. And you are a stubborn man. Maybe that is why this makes sense. The cowboy stepped closer, his hand brushing against hers, as he folded the contract back into her palm. If we do this, it will not be because of your name or your fortune. It will be because of who you are when the world strips everything else away. Her eyes glistened. That is all I have ever wanted. To be seen for who I am, not what I own. And there, in the quiet aftermath of betrayal and violence, two souls scarred by different battles found something rare, an unspoken promise of love and loyalty, born not from wealth, but from survival, truth, and the choice to stand together. The sun dipped low over the desert horizon, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold. Evelyn stood outside the shack, the contract still clutched in her hand. The weight of the day pressed against her. Yet for the first time since her ordeal began, her heart felt light. The cowboy joined her, his boots crunching against the sand. He stood beside her in silence, both of them watching as the desert transformed beneath the fading light. For a long moment, neither spoke. Words seemed too fragile for the enormity of what had passed between them. At last, Evelyn turned to him, her eyes shimmering. I have spent my entire life in boardrooms, fighting battles with numbers and signatures. But this, what happened here? It changed me. You changed me. He studied her carefully, his expression unreadable. You changed yourself. I just happened to be there when you decided to stop hiding. Her lips curved into a faint smile. Maybe. But you gave me the courage to stand in my truth, and I will not forget that. She reached for his hand, hesitant at first, then firmer when he did not pull away. His palm was calloused, rough with years of labor, but to her it felt steady, grounding. He squeezed her hand gently, as though acknowledging the bond that had grown between them. Evelyn Hart, he said slowly, his voice carrying the weight of a vow. I do not care about your fortune. I do not care about your name. What matters to me is that you are alive, that you fought back, and that you are standing here now. If we walk this road together, it will be as equals. No masks, no lies. Agreed. Her breath caught, tears threatening to spill. That is all I have ever wanted. Not power, not control. Just someone who will stand beside me, not because of what I own, but because of who I am. The wind swept across the desert, carrying with it the scent of earth and freedom. She looked out over the horizon and imagined not just her empire, not just the boardrooms that awaited her return, but the possibility of a life shared with someone who had shown her the meaning of integrity and loyalty. She leaned closer, her forehead brushing against his shoulder, and whispered, "Thank you for finding me when I was lost. He rested a hand on her back, steady and warm. "Thank you for letting me." The sky darkened, stars beginning to pierce the twilight. In the quiet of the desert, their hands remained intertwined. Two lives forever altered by a chance encounter that began with betrayal and ended with truth. And as the night settled around them, Evelyn Hart and the cowboy stood together, not as a millionaire and a ranch hand, but as two souls bound by survival, justice, and the promise of a love forged in the harshest of places yet destined to endure.